Welcome to the Core Outdoors podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rawls. This podcast is aimed at helping entrepreneurs in the outdoor industry. Each episode is a conversation with an entrepreneur willing to share what they've learned so that we can benefit from their experiences. This podcast is brought to you by CORE, the Kootenay Outdoor Recreation Enterprise. CORE is a nonprofit organization based in the Kootenay region of interior British Columbia. CORE's mission is to support the growing network of gear and apparel makers and entrepreneurs within the Kootenays. Every year, CORE hosts the Summit. The CORE Summit is the only place where the outdoor, bike, and ski industries come together in Canada. It's the opportunity to connect and learn from one another. This year's conference will include keynote speakers, industry-specific presentations, and workshops on topics like marketing, intellectual property, wholesale sales, e-commerce, accounting, and more. This year's summit is on October 3rd and 4th in Kimberley, BC. We'd love to have you join us there, so register today at coreoutdoors.org/summit. My conversation today is with Georgia Grace Edwards, co-founder and CEO of Gnara. Gnara is an outdoor apparel brand with their patented GoFly zipper technology, which allows women to pee outside without removing clothing. Gnara is producing their own line of apparel, as well as licensing their technology to other brands. Georgia Grace is a driven founder who's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for her startup by winning pitch competitions and winning over investors. In my conversation with her, we talk about how she mastered the art of the pitch, why they secured their intellectual property so early in the process, and how they're building a flywheel around licensing their technology and building out their own branded products. We talk about the lack of work-life balance for early-stage founders, why solving a real problem is what inspires her to keep going every day, the many catch-22s of being a small business owner, and how they'll make the most of unsolicited advice by being curious. She said something in the conversation that has really stuck with me. She said, starting a business is the most vulnerable thing you can do. If that doesn't make you want to listen to this episode, I don't know what will. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Georgia Grace as much as I did. What's your first or best memory of being outside?
There are so many that come to mind. I think one of my first has to be, I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains in Western Maryland, and our whole backyard was a field that had been an old reclaimed mining site. And it was this incredible sledding hill. You could go from our back deck to a road over a mile away, all on a sled. And in the summer, there was this huge tree that was surrounded by bushes that you could crawl in under. And it was my own bridge to Terabithia fort. And I would go there with my neighbor friends and with my younger brother, basically every season. So that's one that sticks out as a place where I had my own space and could do what I wanted in that space. And my mom would pack little picnics essentially that I could take down there, which was really fun. And I don't know, I think sometimes I would do homework out there or little arts and crafts projects or photo shoots with my friends. Yeah, I haven't thought about that in a long time, but that was a cool spot.
That's great. Do you still have places, or do you still kind of go to nature for that type of, because that kind of sounds like not escape, but regeneration or rejuvenation. Do you still find yourself doing that now?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely grew up in a place where I felt like I didn't fit in. In traditional Appalachian towns, if you don't have multiple generations of family who are from there, you're essentially an outsider. And that was definitely a place I would go to decompress and say what I actually wanted to say. My brother and I would do little skits of I still think he will go into late night satire comedy of some kind. And I think he gets that from how he would process our days, going to public school in Appalachia is definitely an experience that I don't think my parents fully realized what it was like for us until after. But yeah, even to this day when I feel stuck, I try to go outside. Even last night, I was trying to problem solve something and I packed a little picnic and went out to a trail up in the mountains in the woods here in Crested Butte and just sat and ate and thought on it, and it definitely helped. Yeah, still definitely something I do.
That's awesome. Yeah, we do want to talk about where you are now, how you found yourself to be in Colorado, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I guess a good place to start for you and Gnara is like, tell me the story about how you decided, or the moment when you decided to create a company to help solve the problem of women being able to be outside.
I think that there hasn't been like one moment where we decided to make this a business. I think it's been much more an evolution where we're faced with this choice and we keep choosing the thing that ends up building the business. But the moment where I got the idea for what is now Gnara and the patented GoFly zipper technology was a summer that I spent working as a glacier guide in Alaska in college. And so I was working on the Mendenhall for 8 to 12 hours a day, usually as the only woman. And in comparison to the guys who could unzip, turn around, go whenever, wherever, I found myself having to trek across the glacier, carefully avoiding crevasses, completely remove 3 to 4 layers in freezing temperatures, do my thing, put it all back on, and hike back to work. And that process was just a huge waste of time and energy that often left me feeling cold for hours after. And it got to the point where I started dehydrating myself, which unfortunately is not an uncommon story among women in the outdoors. And as a guide who was supposed to be at peak physical performance and responsible for other people's safety up on the glacier, I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this, and just got kind of obsessed with the idea and did a deep dive on the history of women's pants, or the lack thereof. And in the United States, women weren't permitted to wear pants or shorts through the 70s and 80s at a lot of colleges and universities. Women couldn't wear pants on the floor of the US Senate until 1993. So like the women's pant or bottom industry is extremely young, which explains why such little innovation has happened within it, because women haven't been wearing this article of clothing for that long. And I don't remember it this way, but a lot of college friends, when they recounted so that was the summer before I believe my sophomore or junior year of college. And they said that all I talked about during that time was like a better way to pee while wearing your pants. I think I was bringing it up on like first dates and on the weekends and at parties and in the dining hall, which, yeah, it didn't seem obvious to me at the time. But in hindsight, I think I was doing a lot of like informal market testing. And then my senior spring, I took a 4-week entrepreneurship class where you enter with a super rough idea and exit with, in theory, a full working business model. And so I spent that winter break with my childhood best friend in her attic, sewing a bunch of pants and snow bibs and sweatpants that we'd gotten from the Goodwill, and then trying all these different sewing mechanisms with supplies we got from Joann Fabrics. So we had like Velcro and zippers and buttons and snaps, you name it, we tried it. She had sewn a lot of her own prom dresses, so she was a lot more skilled than I was. I hadn't sewn since 7th grade home economics class. So the initial prototypes were quite rough in terms of how they looked, but the functionality was there from the very first one. And that's what I took to that class, and then won the pitch competition at the end 4 weeks later, which was $250. And I took that to a local seamstress, and she helped me refine the design. And that's how we started.
Wow. So you literally said you ended with $250 in your pocket. You're like, okay, this is enough seed money for me to go launch this thing.
Exactly. Yeah. We were bootstrapped for a long time, which was a great way to, I think, de-risk things. There were plenty of, so that was my January of my senior year. And there were people then who were urging me to drop out of college. And I was like, I have worked so incredibly hard to leave where I grew up, get into this college. There's no way I'm dropping out with 1 semester to go. And then it ended up being more of a side hustle while I worked full time, and while I had co-founders who were still in school full time for several years. And I've now been running Gnara for almost 3 years full time. Wow. So it's been a journey.
Yeah, and the product has come a long way. I mean, I didn't get to see the first prototype, but I've seen the product now, and the product is very refined and has come a long way. How did you go through the product development process? Like, how did you get it to the level that it is today? How did you move from the attic to the floors of the best retailers in America?
Yeah. It, I am still a little bit mortified when I see pictures of the early day prototypes. Like every once in a while, they'll resurface somewhere, or even when I look at our first crowdfunding campaign and the product that those backers got, I know there's the founder of LinkedIn has some quote that's like, if you're not horrified by what you've launched, then you're not moving fast enough. And I definitely have found that to be true. But yeah, the current product, you can't tell there's a zipper there at all. In fact, sometimes that's a hurdle in marketing, is because it's hard to tell what's special about it compared to any other pair of pants. But the process, yeah, it was a lot of very slow, working with a seamstress one-on-one. A lot of taking existing pants, ripping out the crotch seam, putting in a cheap zipper. And I think in some ways that's a little bit backwards to typical product development, where you're starting with a fabric you know you love and then kind of building a product around it. And for us, we were always starting with the technology we knew we wanted our products to have, and then trying to find fits and fabrics that could accommodate it in a way that was discreet and functional and comfortable. And we were able to get far enough with seamstresses to then be able to find someone who could do a tech pack, which is essentially it's like an architect's blueprint, but for a piece of apparel as opposed to a building. And that is what we used to approach our first factory, which was an introduction from one of our college professors who'd gone to grad school with someone who ended up opening a factory. And so it was kind of just asking at every step of the way for who the next person we should talk to was. And in the early days, we actually functioned as more of a service-based company than a product-based company, in the sense that students on campus and professors and people from town would bring us their cross-country ski pants or their pajama pants or their jeans and say, hey, can you put a zipper in this? And I would say, I can't make any guarantees about how it's going to look, but it will work. And that was all they cared about. And so that was enough to really make a lot of iterations to the design, and hearing this one-on-one feedback in super specific use cases. So I'm grateful for that time, because it helped us figure out a lot about the design and how we wanted it to look and feel and work.
Did you ever bring up?
But yeah, the early prototypes were navy blue ski bibs with a bright yellow zipper, no flap covering it, or lime green, hot pink. There was not a lot of discretion going on. I can't believe that people took me seriously at pitch competitions and things, but they did. So
that's amazing. I do love that idea of if you're not cringing at your first version, then you're waiting too long. I think that's super important, and it's a good reminder of how much people can look past what we think is the faults, because they see, oh no, you're solving a real problem. I like this. This is solving a problem. I can look past what it looks like right now, because I know you're solving a problem. Did you ever
exactly? They could see the bigger vision almost before I could.
Yeah, which is a testament to you're solving a real problem.
Yeah.
Did you ever have to bring in the early days a kind of a contract apparel designer, or was this all self-taught? Let me just figure out how to make this work.
In the early days, it was all us, and we had a small team, and all not doing it for free, and none of us had a background in apparel or design. We went to a liberal arts college, so that you couldn't study business or any kind of art or design kind of thing. Obviously the local seamstresses were pretty experienced in what they were doing, and then the tech pack designer is pretty specialized, and so that was a specific contracted position. And now today we have a full-time product developer and designer. That was the first role that we hired, because that is so core to our mission and what we do in every single licensing stream that we have. But yeah, it's been a lot of figuring it out. And honestly, most entrepreneurs that I admire don't have a background in what they're doing. It's more the ability to Google and ask questions and figure it out that takes you further than some specific skill set, I think, at least so far.
I agree. As speaking as a English and history major, I think that we make wonderful entrepreneurs, because we can take big ideas and solve problems, and
yes, and communicate it effectively, and yeah.
Yeah. And draw on a bunch of resources. So no, I think I 100% agree. You mentioned the licensing and now you have, and we'll get into like how does Gnara, like where do the revenue streams come from? But I'm really interested in the licensing because you have secured patents for your IP, and can you go into that a little bit of like, was this the original plan? Like, oh, this is the technology is the zipper. Like, what came first? Are we going to license this technology, or are we going to make a brand around this technology?
Yes, licensing was always the big long-term picture. And so, for example, that last semester of college, I was working 4 jobs to pay for the initial legal fees to start patenting the design and to pay for my tuition. So we now have design and utility patents in over 30 countries. And the reason that intellectual property and obtaining it was important to me was, one, I knew going into something that was taboo like this, that was potentially easy to, laugh off or take as a joke, which we definitely make plenty of jokes, but I knew to be taken seriously, ultimately, we needed to have a patent behind it, because that tends to catch people's attention. It's why people will just put even like patent pending on their products, because it's this symbol of legitimacy and technicality and buzzwords like that make people pay attention. The other reason was that I knew that I wanted to get this technology into as many hands as possible. The idea is for the GoFly zipper to be the norm in bottoms across industry, across genders, instead of the exception. And I knew that I single-handedly, and we as a small team, were not going to be able to do that without basically walking other brands through how to offer this technology in their products and to convince them that it was a good idea to do so. So Gnara is the marketing engine for the GoFly technology. And so we do a lot of our testing and product market fit and proving demand and traction through our own Gnara products, which then increases demand and requests for licensing applications in things that tend to be a bit more specialized, whether because it's a seasonal piece of apparel, or it's a higher price point, or it's in a market where women's participation isn't yet as high as it is in other places. So great examples of things we'd love to license into are fishing waders, or any kind of workwear application, military uniforms, things that we as a small brand can't take on ourselves to manufacture and hold the risk of design, development, manufacturing, storing, selling, etc., but can certainly walk another company through quite easily based on our experience.
I like that idea of it's like you've built a really good flywheel for the technology, in the sense of like people come in and get looped around, and you keep building your both revenue streams from the flywheel, which is, it's a great way to build a business.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're also essentially following the blueprint that a lot of outdoor brands have, in starting with a more technical, niche, higher price point initial flagship product, and then they end up becoming majority licensing companies. So if you think about Vibram soles, they started in a mountaineering boot, or BOA dials, they started as just the turn dial on a snowboard boot, or Kizik is like a hands-free, like slip-on technology in shoes. They started with their own shoe. Now they're licensing to Nike. Or Gore-Tex is the one that most people think of. They started with that lamination process for their own jacket, and now thousands of different brands license that technology. That's exactly what we're going for here, with slight differences. Of course, some of those are only licensing a raw material. Some of those are only licensing a trademark. There's like a wide range of things within those. But the basic idea is the same, of being first to market and proving something out, and then getting demand from both customers and other businesses to implement that technology in other applications where it would be extremely useful.
Yeah, I'm not really smart in, a lot of things, but one of them is IP. Like I just don't have a lot of experience in it. And from my limited experience with it, I've heard both sides of the argument of, oh, go secure your patent. And the other side is, good luck, because you can't defend it anyways. What is, like, you have a bunch of patents, you said, in 30 different countries. Give me the case for, just so I can learn more. Give me the case for why it's super important to do what you've done.
There's so many I could point to, and this is always an ongoing discussion. But for the reasons I mentioned at the start, that's why I knew I wanted to get the IP, no matter whether that did or didn't open us up to more people potentially wanting to rip it off if they thought it was more valuable. I also think that focus on IP can be a hindrance to people at the beginning. Like, I do remember being kind of holding back or not fully telling people what I was working on, or feeling afraid to share the idea because I was afraid it would get like ripped off right from the start. And the reality is that, like, in the early days, all you should be doing is talking about it, because it's that initial feedback that's immediately going to make it better. And I think that's worth the risk. But you only know what you know at a certain point in time. The argument for like your IP only being as good as your ability to defend it, I'm sure there is some truth in that, but also, like, there are very few brands I can name that I know have millions of dollars in a separate bank account set aside for no other purpose than a potential litigation someday. So I don't think that's a super realistic way to operate. If you think about recent cases like Backcountry, when after every small brand that had Backcountry in the name, whether it was a restaurant, a retailer, a small brand of some kind, an artist, for that IP trademark reason, and then however many months later had to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements because the public was like, we're not confused about what's Backcountry and what's not, and we support all of these independent businesses. And so they ended up owing a ton for being so predatory and like unnecessarily aggressive on that front. And so I think that really points to the case of what's more important, I think, than having this like insane reserve of cash is having customer loyalty, because that's who's ultimately going to be defending your product and your patent more than a court case is going to. So it's really that like boots on the ground, I guess, analogy or feel. And we've experienced that firsthand, just having gone through a rebrand over a year now at this point. But there are still instances where I'll be at a trade show or somewhere where like I feel like all we've talked about for the past year and the year before that was the rebrand, but there's still always people who don't know. And sometimes when I'm pitching someone, I can tell there's this almost uneasiness, and I'll just ask a bunch of questions until it eventually comes out. And the person will be like, well, we supported another company that did this first, and you're infringing on their patent, and we're going to tell them. And then I'll always say, She Fly? And they'll be like, yes. And they'll be like, thank you so much. That is actually us. Our name is now Gnara. And this is the exact kind of brand loyalty that I suspected was out there. And this is like a real-time enactment of that. So I think that aspect is more important, at least cool. Right now. Knock on wood. Hopefully I'm not now like facing a multi-million-dollar case at the end of this podcast. But.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it reinforces that flywheel we were talking about a second ago, in that the benefit of having your own brand that is representing the technology while at the same time going out and licensing technology. It's like you're reinforcing from both sides, and the proof's in the pudding there with people defending your IP to yourself.
Yes.
That's awesome. I guess I have to ask the question then, how many people have tried to knock you off so far?
None that I know of directly. There have certainly been like Kickstarter campaigns for similar to solve for the same problem, but in different ways that are inferior because of the functionality or because of the look or because of the comfort level. Yeah, I honestly don't want to say anything to jinx myself because I think that's kind of
I got you. I was just curious.
No, we definitely have a pretty expansive IP that we obviously have invested in from the start. And the design has undergone so many iterations that we feel extremely confident that this is absolutely the best way to do this.
Yeah. So you mentioned the importance of having that boots on the ground, brand loyalty. How did you, well, I mean, I'll back up by saying, I guess if you were a service business to start, you probably built a lot of loyal fans from the beginning because you were kind of making everybody's day. But when you actually brought out your own product, and here we go, we're going to market with originally what was called She Fly, your own bottoms, like shorts and pants. How did you build that early market loyalty and brand loyalty and kind of build that part of the business out?
It's been really consistent transparency always. And particularly on social media. I think we're really lucky in that we chose the perfect time to launch this product, in that we've gotten to ride the coattails of a lot of really important, primarily D2C companies who have solved for problems for women's pleasure, women's discomfort specifically. And so they kind of broke the ice in being able to even talk about these things to begin with. Like, I got to grow up in a world where like women's sustainable period underwear and vibrators are like on New York Times billboards. And that was just not the case for the generation right before me, for example. So getting to like launch at a time where people are already more willing to talk about something that historically has been taboo was really lucky. Also being able to launch at a time when D2C is a way you can launch a business, where you can talk directly to a customer without any middlemen, like filtering the story or I guess putting any kind of opinion on it, and just letting the actual end customer speak to the product itself and how successful it will be. I think that's really lucky. I think one of the reactions I get most frequently is, I can't believe you're the first person to think of this. And there's no way I'm the first person to think of this. I think most women throughout history have thought about this in some capacity if they've spent any time outside. And we still get messages all the time from women who are like, thank you so much for doing this. I've been like doing my own DIY solutions in my mountaineering pants for decades, kind of thing. And so like, I know people who have tried to launch similar things or solve for similar problems, but they were doing it before you could sell online. And so they were trying to convince men in gear stores who only really sold to other men that this was something that there was a market for. So I think we really lucked out with timing and being able to build the base and speak directly to customers and have really listened to them at every step of the way. So I'd say our first kind of major move towards a business was our I Fund Women crowdfunding campaign that we did in 2019. And our goal was to do 15,000, and we did over 55,000 in a month. So we sold, it was around 500 pairs of pants. And that we closed at the end. We started production from that at the end of 2019 into Q1 of 2020. We all know what happened then. Our factory went out of business overnight, and we lost everything that had not already left the factory, which was still like over a third of orders. And so we pretty immediately had to pivot into no longer like being a product-based company that no longer had product, which means all we had were our words. And so the way that we kept customers for 2 years between COVID starting and, you know, manufacturing no longer being a thing for anyone to actually getting product again 2 years later was just like consistent updates about what we were working on, what we were learning, asking people their opinions on things. Our TikTok in 2022 went from 1,000 to 100,000 followers. And a lot of that was just sharing behind the scenes and showing like, yeah, what we were actually doing, what the product looked like, what our ideas for it were. And that felt, I think COVID like forced us into that. I'm not sure if it would have come as naturally to send manufacturing updates and like admit that nothing was going right, really, if we hadn't been in that position. And that it's that exact scenario that allowed us to grow an organic wait list of over 5,000 people from the close of that campaign to us eventually getting product in 2022, who were all of our early adopters. And I think we maybe did like 5 refunds in that time. Of course, if everyone who we owed product to had requested a refund, we would have gone out of business / we were never fully in business at that time. So it's that kind of customer loyalty that I don't think we'd be here without, and that we feel super grateful for and continues today. Like our first licensing deal, for example, which was in overalls with Libsyn, that came about because our direct to consumer customers, the 2 products they wanted to see most next were leggings and overalls. And so we were like, okay, we're already doing leggings ourselves later this year. Overalls, we can easily partner with someone to do. And so it's that kind of like direct feedback and like one-on-one conversation that directly informs major directionality decisions in the business. And I think that's something that people appreciate, like feeling like they're heard and that someone's like actively trying to solve their problems. And I think that's been a huge like learning for me too in entrepreneurship, is that I assumed that it was going to be nonstop pitching myself and the business and the product, which it has been a lot of that. But I actually think it's been more listening than anything else. Like people just want to feel heard. And a lot of companies don't bother to do that because they haven't had to.
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. I think the big thing is that you're building in public. It forced you to build in public, right? And I think that's a really important thing for a small brand is like full transparency. This is how we're doing it. These are the highs and these are the lows. And when we expose those things to our customers, people want to buy from people. And so you're humanizing the process. And so they're bought in from the beginning. The question I have for you is, you kind of joked that you weren't really in business at the time, but you basically went through a year and a half or two with no product to sell, or kind of changing out the product. It's just wait, it's coming. How did you make it through? I know you've taken on some investment. Is that how you kind of survived those lean years? Was through investment and kind of selling the future idea to people?
No, that was not an option in those early years. So it was, I guess, a bit of a silver lining in that because we didn't have anyone on payroll, it's not like we had to go out of business because we weren't paying anyone or ourselves anyway. On the flip side, we also didn't qualify for any PPP loans because we didn't have anyone on payroll. So we kind of just kept existing in this like gray area of kind of being a thing and could be a thing, but aren't really yet, just talking about being a thing. We had the traction from the crowdfunding campaign, so that certainly helped. And I was working in economic consulting at the time and decided I was like, okay, if I can't pivot and do a business right now, and there's no possible way for, like, if the largest companies in the world are not able to get product right now, I'm not naive enough to think that I somehow will be able to. But I could use this time to learn everything I possibly can that I wouldn't necessarily have time to learn otherwise. So I did a lot of online founder communities and mainly accelerators. Accelerators were kind of our key to leveling up. And so we did two really important ones for all of 2021. The first was the Moose Jaw Mountaineering Outdoor Industry Accelerator, which is what ultimately brought us to Colorado. And that was focused on wholesale retail relationships for new brands. And so we ended that accelerator with a $50,000 purchase order from Moose Jaw, and they paid for half of that up front, which is unheard of in apparel. Usually it's like net 30, net 60, net 90, and that's a 8+ month timeline depending on the product in the season. So we had that in our pocket. And then we followed that up with the Mass Challenge Accelerator out of Boston, which is where I was living for most of the pandemic. And that was not industry specific. And so there were over 200 companies and in biotech and AI and every possible sector you could think of. And we ended that accelerator by winning the Diamonds Pitch Award, which went to one company out of over those 200 companies. And it was $100,000 cash, no equity, no debt, no interest, no strings attached. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, I think I can go full time. This is enough to pay for at least a portion of the first manufacturing run. And without those two accelerators, I would not have had like the skills or the network to ultimately bring back to the business. So those were pretty key moments for us.
Holy. Wow, you earned yourself $100,000 from a pitch, basically. I mean, I know you put on a ton of work, but that pitch earned you $100,000.
Yeah.
Okay,
this is it. Lucrative pitch I've ever done.
That's amazing. 100,000 cash. Yeah, 100,000 cash. I watched your episode on the pitch show. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
The pitch show. And it was great to watch because the VCs that you pitched to, you left the room and they all just they really pumped your tires. They were super impressed with your pitch, as was I. How did you get so good at, I mean, I know reps, you put in a lot of reps, but what do you think makes you so good at telling your story and your brand story and pitching to investors or customers?
I think it's that I wholeheartedly believe it, like with my whole being. I think the parts of entrepreneurship that I struggle with are the places where I feel like I have to put on a facade of some sort, either to please a customer or to get some high net worth investor to pay attention to me, or I don't know, to be able to work with someone. And it's really hard for me to do things that don't feel authentic. And I think that's kind of the whole point of starting your own thing, is being able to do it in the way that you want to do it and in the way that you think is best. I started out pre-med and then essentially came to this conclusion that it doesn't matter how good doctors are if they're not capable of communicating effectively. It doesn't actually help the patient. So then I thought I was going to go into something of like basically translating scientific publications to a general audience to like get the useful bits of information. And then I thought I was going to just go into writing in general. And then I ended up majoring in international politics and economics with a minor in global health. So it was a little bit of everything. But what all of those interests had in common was this like deep desire to tell a story in a way that resonated with people and to tell a story that I feel like is worth telling. And that's what pitching is for me. It's like the only environment where you can get real-time feedback just based on people's facial expressions or emotions or sounds or responses to see how things are resonating. And there's like no other environment that I can think of where you can learn that quickly with real-time feedback. And so I think that's why, there are plenty of people who are like, oh, once you reach a, 7-figure business stage, you should stop doing pitch competitions. It's not really worth your time. You're too big for that. And I couldn't disagree more. I think like that is the only place where you can really hone in on your pitch, get a temperature for like what the true, I'd say like what's trending or what people are caring about at a certain period of time is, and get inspired by new ideas. Or that all happens in places where you pitch. So it's something that I genuinely enjoy doing and genuinely believe in, and like am always surprised by, no matter how many times I do it. Like our first pitch was to Vermont has some pretty cool pitch competitions. That's where I went to college. And one was called Road Pitch, and a group of angel investors ride around from town to town on motorcycles, and local business owners and entrepreneurs pitch them in each of these rural Vermont towns and the Green Mountains. And we did one, and I show up in the town, I get on stage, and I look out, and it's probably, maybe 100 people in a room, all wearing like leather motorcycle pants, almost all men, maybe like 5 women in the room. And I get on stage and I'm like, oh man, I don't know exactly what I'm doing yet, but I'm pretty sure this is not my target audience. And ended up winning the investor choice and the crowd favorite. And that was a moment where I was like, oh, I think we're super on to something if we can win in an environment like this and convince people who don't seem like the core adopters of what we're doing. And so, yeah, I think it's like a series of experiences like that have allowed me to learn what I know now. People will ask me like, oh, did you go through so-and-so's like pitch boot camp? And no, I haven't done any pitch boot camps, but I am informally pitching and formally pitching all the time. So I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, I would say that you're very, very good at it. And sometimes I ask people like, what do you think you're world class at? And I'm just going to answer it for you. If you could pitch a room full of men wearing leather motorcycle pants that they should invest in women's pants, then you're world class at pitching. With pitching comes a lot of, or just sales in general. Let's just call it sales. Let's just take away pitching for a moment and just call it sales, because that's what we're doing. We're selling. In sales, there is the fear of rejection that will hold back a lot of people, right? And so you face that, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. What do you do, and how do you handle things mentally when you're going? And this is for pitching or selling or just riding the roller coaster of entrepreneurship. What are you doing for yourself to maintain balance and equilibrium as you like go through the roller coaster of these things?
What balance? I always laugh because I feel like there are so many like blogs and businesses and boot camps that are all about helping founders find work-life balance. And I just don't think that's a thing. Like, I do not think you can give birth to something on a huge scale and not sacrifice most things in your life.
Sure.
I don't think that I call it like the Steve Jobs narrative of entrepreneurship, which up until recently, I think has been the narrative that's most widely promoted, which is that you drop out of college, move home to your parents' basement, build something and emerge however many months later with a unicorn business. Like, I don't think that's accessible to most people, nor do I think it's realistic. And it leaves out all the other ways there are to start something, which for a lot of underrepresented founders, especially, looks like bootstrapping something, having it be a side hustle for a long time, working multiple jobs for a while. And that's just as legitimate of a way to build a business than going straight to VC backed. And I've done like every variation of that in between those two extremes, and continue to. I think what keeps me going when I get frustrated or discouraged is knowing that I am solving for a real problem because it was my real problem, and it was a real problem that I observed in the lives of all the women around me. And so holding on to like, okay, this, maybe it's less relevant of a problem for this person, or maybe they feel uncomfortable about talking about it, and so that's why they're going to write me off. Knowing that at the end of the day, I still have tens of thousands of people who this does resonate for. I try to always pay attention to, of course, always listen to the feedback and the criticism, but not to weigh it more, not to let it take up more space in my head than the feedback from cheerleaders, because those are ultimately the people that make things a thing, for lack of a better phrase. And I think that a lot of advice growing up and in college was to just, if you just follow your passion, like, you'll figure it out. That never, as someone who's simultaneously passionate about everything and also nothing, that didn't resonate with me or like help me make any decisions. But I have always leaned into the things that piss me off. And so that's like my personal mantra, because if you're so personally frustrated by something, it means you are more familiar with the problem and better equipped to solve for it because you've thought about it than most people. And if it's a pain point for you, it's probably a pain point for someone else. And so I think holding on to that has helped me a lot. And then making sure I get in-person FaceTime with people who are actively using our technology and benefiting from it. That really inspires me when I hear about the things that other people and women are doing when they wear our products. That keeps me feeling motivated.
Yeah. I totally agree with you in the sense that the idea of that having like a balance when you're launching a business is, it doesn't exist. You get to a point, and I hope that you get to a point in a business where you can like start to regain balance. But regardless of if
I do too.
Yeah,
I'm not there yet.
Well, regardless of whether you are feeling the balance in the sense of like work-life balance, there's a mental balance, and I think that's what you've touched on too. Is like you're kind of keep going back to the well of inspiration in the sense of like going to your customers and going to your fans and letting them pump you up and keep you going. I think that's super important.
And I think just being able to laugh at stuff, including yourself, like to realize that nothing is actually that serious and people say ridiculous things all the time. And if you actually internalized all of that, like no one would accomplish anything.
Yeah.
That's
so. I mean, we had in our intro call a couple weeks ago when we were talking about this. You mentioned something about the unsolicited feedback that you've gotten from people. I mean, this is like so classic for entrepreneurs. It's like, oh, you do that, you know what you should do, and then it's like, oh, please let me get out my pen and paper. Let's go. And those sometimes, and I'm guilty of that too. In the early days, you're like I was taking it all in, and oh right, and then I could spend like hours or days sometimes like going down this dumb rabbit trail of like somebody else's dream for my life. I was like, no, hold on. There could be great feedback in it too, but it's like, putting the filter on and reminding yourself, who am I doing this for?
And trying to, yes, I mean, as I shared when we were talking about it previously, it is very hard for me to not subconsciously roll my eyes when someone starts a sentence with, you know what you should do, because there's no way I haven't thought about it already. But using those opportunities instead of like experiencing frustration, instead trying to approach those experiences with from a place of curiosity.
Nice.
So they'll say like, you know what you should do this. And I'll be like, I thought about that, but like, here are the 5 factors that come up once you get past thinking about the first stage of that idea. What do you think about that? And then they'll always be like, oh, good point. I hadn't thought of that. Or like, oh, well, if that's the actual thing, have you ever talked to someone who's involved in X? And then it can actually lead to a place that can be a breakthrough in some way.
Nice.
But the surface level statement of like, you should do this. A, it's never that simple. And B, sometimes it's not something you actually should do. But I think it usually takes a bit more questioning and a bit more conversation to actually realize that.
For sure. And sometimes you just got to say, sorry, Mom, I'm not interested in talking about that right now.
Yeah. Or say, if you think I should do that, why don't, like, I'm actually not going to do that, but you should do that. Like, if you want to solve for that, that can be your thing.
Nice. I want to talk a little bit about the business itself and like the operations of the business, because you have Gnara, the brand, and then you also have the licensing, and you have wholesale, and you have direct to consumer. Like, where's the business at now? And you have to give into numbers, but more like into ratios of like how do you structure, or how is the revenue structure now, and where do you want it to go? Like, what is the ideal kind of balance between the Gnara, the brand, direct consumer and wholesale, and then the licensing deals? Like, what's the future look like, or what are you aiming for in that?
Yeah, right now we are majority direct to consumer online, and we're supported by several strategic wholesale retail partnerships, and then just got our first licensing deal with more on the horizon. So right now we are a really small team managing 3 different revenue streams, and therefore 3 different business models. They do all support each other, right? Like, the more brand recognition and technology recognition you have from your direct to consumer customers, the more demand there is to see this in stores. The more you see this in stores, the more it's legitimized as a technology that like all brands want to be able to have a hang tag about in store and online. But when you move certain factors in each of those channels, it also affects them. So for example, if we need to move through a certain product and we set it on sale on our site, that obviously is less advantageous for our wholesale partners. So it's a constant like juggling act of which you're prioritizing when. The ultimate goal is to become a majority licensing company, because that will allow us to make the biggest impact and to keep solving this on the largest scale. And in the most like different applications that we couldn't do just through D2C and wholesale revenue streams. But I think in today's day and age, when like there are very quick economic and political and shifts, it's important to be an omni-channel business that if one thing isn't working, you can pivot into another thing. But it does come at the trade-off of like always being spread thinly between them.
We talked about you used the phrase the catch-22 of being a small business, and one of the kind of the main things that comes up around that is like growing that wholesale business and relying on independent sales reps. That's a conversation I've had independent sales reps on this podcast, and I've had this conversation with other people about independent sales reps. So it's a recurring theme. I love sales reps. A lot of them are my close friends. I think they're great people. But as a brand, it can be sometimes an awkward situation. So using the lens of the catch-22 of a small business, you could talk about independent sales reps and your experience of that and that. But if there's other kind of catch-22s of being a small brand, I'd love to hear them from you, because that can open the door for a lot of learning for other people in your shoes.
Yeah, I kind of feel like every aspect of a business is a catch-22. That's why it's so hard. You make progress in one area, but then it like hinders progress in another. Or it's also, I guess, a field where the goalpost of success is always moving. And we've experienced that.
How does that, explain that a little bit? Talk about that a bit more.
Because it's so fast paced, the metric of success is always changing based on what's happening. So for example, if we limit this to like just fundraising, for example, it used to be that before you go out for a price round, let's say, you needed to be $1 million business. And that was like the only criteria. It was grow top line revenue, nothing else matters. We grow to $1 million business, and now it's like, before you do a price round, we also want you to have a licensing deal. We get the licensing deal. Now it's like, okay, before you go for a price round, you need to be profitable, be $1 million business, have 2 licensing deals, have X number of months with X% growth. It's just this like journey where there isn't a clear end point other than going under, which is always the most likely option, or some kind of exit. And there isn't like an exact point in time where those things are guaranteed to happen, which means you're like trying to follow a blueprint that you're also writing in real time constantly. And that mentally is a lot to hold and make sense of. And I think that's why certain, like the quote about like, if you're not ashamed of your version 1, you're not doing it right, mentality is helpful, because it's kind of the only way to measure progress in a field that's super nebulous and lonely and like not clearly defined in any way. Yeah, one of my friends from med school was just visiting me here in the Rocky Mountains, and she's now in residency, and just she doesn't have to make any decisions really besides like where she's applying at each stage of the game, versus everything I'm doing is a decision at every moment of the day. And so I think it's easy to be envious of that. But in the example of sales reps, for example, it's like to reach a certain scale, you need other people besides the founder selling your stuff. But also to get to it, it's also undefined what the scale is you need to get to before other people are willing to help you sell your stuff. And so with sales reps, like it's a commission basis. So their bread and butter is with huge household name accounts where they can make a livable commission that pays their mortgage. But at the same time, those huge household name brands are not brands that actually need sales reps, because everyone's asking for them naturally anyway. So that's a great example of a catch-22 where, you know, I can go out and single-handedly secure 40 new wholesale accounts, but still be told that we're not well known enough yet to have a sales rep agency. But the only way we're going to get well known enough to do that is if other people help sell us. So there's a lot of stuff like that where there isn't a clear answer other than try all the things until something works. Yeah. Is my advice so far.
And is that what that's the mission you're on right now, is keep pushing as the founder / seller and then see what happens?
Yeah. On the one hand, the founder being the one to make sales is the most convincing, because you know the product best. And if you're, you know, like I'm CEO and I'm taking time out of my day to like visit a mom and pop shop, that speaks volumes, I think, about like how much we care about our partnership. But at scale is not sustainable to do everything in that way. On the flip side, if a customer goes into a local gear store and is like, I love this brand, can you carry them? That can sometimes carry more weight because it's an objective data point instead of my extremely biased one. So yeah, I forget what your question was on that, but
no, just that was your plan going forward. Is you'll be the salesperson / CEO for the foreseeable future.
Yes. So we did just sign our first small sales rep agency for the Southwest territory. Nice. And that actually came about because of the licensing revenue stream. They were already repping a brand that licensed the GoFly zipper, and so became familiar that way and saw it as more legit because of that deal. And so that's a great example of that one revenue stream now supporting my wholesale retail revenue stream. So yeah.
That's great. We've used that tactic too before, and for our own brand, is going and finding reps that rep brands that we think would work well in relationship to ours, like in a pair to ours. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, well, you already sell this complements it. And sometimes that works because then they can visualize how that would fit in their life together.
Yes. But sometimes that can also be a catch-22 because, you know, our ideal rep, you know, is a woman who can speak really well to this technology. There are so few women sales reps in this industry, and the ones that do exist already have non-competes with other brands that make bottoms that don't have this technology. Yeah. So it's just this like constant roadblock, go around it somehow process, which is both very empowering but also exhausting at times.
Yeah.
Quite frankly.
Entrepreneurship. God bless.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm really curious how you ended up in Gunnison / Crested Butte. Like, how did you end up you went from East Coast to smack dab in a beautiful part of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. How did that happen?
Yeah, so we started from Middlebury College in Vermont. That was HQ. Then I did a Fulbright fellowship living in the Czech Republic, and my co-founders at the time were between Vermont and New Mexico. So HQ didn't really exist. It was 3 different time zones. Then I was living in Boston, fulfilling some crowdfunding orders from my apartment there. So that kind of became HQ. And then we applied for the accelerator programs. And the Moose Jaw one was hosted in a co-working space called the Ice Lab on Western Colorado University's campus in Gunnison, Colorado. And so that's how we ended up here. I took a 2-month leave of absence from my job to do that accelerator and live here in the Rocky Mountains and see what resources were available here. And then coming out of that accelerator with the PO, we were also recruited by the city of Gunnison in the state of Colorado to move our headquarters here because they're trying to build an outdoor industry hub here, because it's good for economic development to have options outside of seasonal jobs in mountain towns for a variety of reasons. And that's, how we ended up here. And we still function in we've never all been in the same place at the same time. So that's still the case, even pre-COVID. Now it's quite common, but we were already a Zoom team before the pandemic and continue to be based on wherever people are located.
That's really interesting because, Cores, we're focused on the Kootenays here in BC and trying to do the same thing, like really growing that outdoor industry and the rec tech sector here. What does that look like to be, what are the nuts and bolts of being recruited by the municipality and the state to relocate there? Who else is involved in that? What do they do to lure you in? Shed some light if you can on what that looks like.
Yeah, for early stage entrepreneurs, especially if you haven't really laid down roots somewhere yet, there are a ton of programs throughout North America that are focused on recruiting small businesses or startups to wherever they're located for those reasons. So definitely worth looking into. For us, Colorado was a place I already wanted to move because of given how strong the outdoor industry already is here. And so that just aligned nicely. The deals vary. I just did a conference keynoted at a conference in Marquette, and they have a similar program where you can come and be a part of an incubator and then ultimately be recruited by the city of Marquette and the state of Michigan to move there. So it tends to be in rural areas that are looking for economic development opportunities. And the structure of the deals is usually something like a municipality and a state match on a grant or a loan of some kind. And then it usually comes with several tax incentives for every full-time job you establish above a certain salary threshold and maintain for however long. So that's what ours looked like. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much for this time. We'll close it down a little bit with 3. They're rapid fire questions, but they don't have to be rapid fire answers. So how do you want to grow as an entrepreneur in the next few years?
A couple things. I think one is managing people. I've been doing this on my own or relatively on my own for so long that I'm looking forward to the stage where I can do a lot more delegation and emptying everything that's in my head to someone else so that I'm not the only keeper of all the things I'm thinking about. And that is something that definitely requires a change in operating. Because especially when you're scrappy and in the bootstrapping stage, it really is, you do it or it doesn't happen. And I think I'm starting to enter a phase where I can lean on others a little bit more, which is something I want to work on. And then the managing piece comes from the fact that I am a young female first-time founder, which means most people I'm hiring are older and in theory more experienced or more specialized in their field. And I think there's a big element of imposter syndrome that comes with that, of feeling like I'm not managing as directly as I want to be because I don't want to step on their toes, because I recognize the value that they bring. But at the same time, I hired them for a reason. So I should probably, stick to those standards and what I expect. So I think that's a big learning thing. And I think in my coming from the corporate world previously, I actually never had a mentor that I found helpful or really connected with. And so it's a special opportunity for me to like create that for someone else without having had a clear vision of it myself. And then I think to go back to an earlier point of just getting more comfortable of doing things, knowing that they won't be perfect or knowing that I will be ashamed of them later. It's still hard to do that. And there are so many times where I procrastinate an update or some important workflow because I'm like, this is my one shot at it. I have to do it correctly on behalf of the business. And the reality is like, it's rarely your one shot. Like it might not go exactly as you plan, but you'll learn from it, and learning something sooner and faster is better than not attempting it. So still trying to lean into that more as I grow as an entrepreneur, which is not easy.
Nice. I'm laughing because I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years. And I think if you asked me that question, I'd give you the same three answers that you just gave me.
Yeah.
So either you're learning very quickly and I'm really slow, or I think we're always kind of at that perpetual stage of unfolding a new level of, God, I could delegate this too, like, or we have imposter syndrome about some aspect of what we're doing. So and that's why I love being an entrepreneur or just entrepreneurship in general, because there's few things in life that you get to discover so many things about yourself in your career. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like it's the work you have to do on yourself is never ending in life. Yeah. But if you want the full length mirror to stare at yourself, go be an entrepreneur. It'll teach you a lot about yourself.
I think starting a business is the most vulnerable thing you can do, and I don't know that I necessarily knew that I signed up for that at the beginning.
Yeah. Not to try to top it, but if you do it with your spouse, it makes it even more.
Ooh.
It makes it even more. I could speak very serious, but at the same time, it is the best thing that you could do for that relationship too. So again, another catch-22. It's hard, and like life, the hard stuff is usually the best stuff. Okay, so my next rapid fire question: if you had to do it all over again, what would you do earlier in the timeline of Gnara?
I'll preface this by saying I actually really struggle with these what if questions because I'm so like pragmatic that I'm like, it's a moot point. There isn't a what if.
And that is a very fine question. You do not have to answer this question, because if you say what ifs don't exist, let's move on. God, that's awesome.
That is kind of how I feel, but for the sake of answering the question, I think that I genuinely think we have approached every step of this business and handled it the best with the information we had at that point in time. So the hindsight 2020 is hard to factor in. I do think we made the best choice. That I don't have these major regrets yet. But I do think a theme that pretty consistently bubbles up is oh, I should have asked for help on that sooner, or I could have asked for help on that sooner. I think managing mentors, there's this dynamic of, only wanting to bring something important to them because you don't want to waste their time and ask them about every single little thing that pops up. When in reality, similar to the customer journey, people just want to feel a part of it. And so being transparent and asking for help at every turn, I think is rarely something that people regret. And so I think that's something I always could have probably done sooner, but didn't know it at the time.
That's great advice. That really good advice. I mean, the purpose of me asking a question like this is more for the people who are 3 years behind you, or 2 years behind you,
Definitely.
or 6 months behind you, because then that right there is a huge nugget of wisdom for other people to learn from. My last question is, how do you define success for yourself?
Oof. As you could probably tell from this conversation, I think that's something that I'm thinking a lot about and feels like it's constantly evolving. There's this coffee table book that has 100 women in it that are all entrepreneurs or artists or some kind of position where they've done it on their own and they've created something. And I tried to read one or two each day. And that's one of the standard questions in the book, and they all define success differently. Like for some, it's this exact dollar amount. For some, it's this exact way of life where they know they can have this kind of house and take this kind of vacations. For others, it's like purely a feeling. They're like, if I feel content, then I'm successful. And I don't know. I think I've kind of considered variations of each of those definitions. The things that I've known I've always wanted to do are like the 3 criteria I've always had for whatever job I'm doing is that I get to work with people. I get to either travel as part of the job or make enough that I can travel, and that I feel like I'm making a positive impact on the world. And those 3 criteria have been met from the start of Gnara. And so by that metric, like I do think I'm successful, but obviously there are so many moments where I don't feel successful because there's some other made up milestone that I'd like, but they're all arbitrary to some degree. So
yeah. And I think
that answers it, but
what's your answer? So
yeah,
that's the beauty of success. And I think that's what I asked that question because we get a lot of information from it and a lot of wisdom from it, but it's also about trying to redefine what success means, because I think it's not one size fits all, right? And I think it's so easy, just like you were talking about earlier about kind of the founder story of like, go build a unicorn. It doesn't have to be like that. And success can be and look like anything you want it to be. We just have to get really clear on what it is for us. And then voila, work hard and you can be successful. Right. I think that's the beautiful thing is we sometimes try to apply other people's definitions to our own lives. And that's when it gets messy.
And day to day, I try to define it as like, do I still feel excited to wake up and work on some aspect of this, even if I'm like really dreading some component of it? And if like overall, if the answer is still yes, then I count that as a success for that day.
That's awesome. Okay. I really appreciate it. We're cheering for you 100%. You are a very compelling CEO and salesperson, and your passion for it, and it all shines through. So we're cheering for you, and I really look forward to seeing where you take this thing, or where it takes you.
Thank you.
Where it takes
that
you.
Means a lot.
So when this episode drops, you will have your new Kickstarter campaign should be live or about to be live. So point us in the direction of where we can learn more about Gnara and how we can support you if we'd like to do that.
Yes, we're on all socials as @Gnara, GNARA_apparel, and our website is gnara.com. The Kickstarter will be for the Go Free 7/8 leggings and the Go Free 6-inch shorts. So both of those products are, the next most requested, and they can be layered with our existing pants. They're compatible for colder weather applications, or they function as standalone items that you can just wear by themselves. So we're super excited for those, and it would mean the world if anyone listening backs us there, because that's ultimately where the first point of traction and success comes from, is a crowdfunding campaign, and kind of sets the tone for the whole direction of everything. So
that's awesome. I know people will definitely go check it out and hopefully supporting you, because like I said, you're a compelling founder and CEO, and so Georgia Grace, it's been awesome to talk to you, and I really appreciate your time.
You too. Thanks so much, Christian.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you know someone who would enjoy this episode, please share it with them. If you enjoyed it, take 30 seconds to give us a review on your podcast player. Ratings and reviews go a long way in spreading the word about the show. It takes hours to create an episode and only 30 seconds to leave a review. We'd really appreciate it. To learn more about CORE, visit coreoutdoors.org. That's KORE outdoors.org. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.